Today we are looking at the 1908 disappearance and death of a woman named Margaret Snow in the United States, a case reconstructed from scattered ledgers, courthouse minutes, and brittle regional newspapers that never fully agreed on the same story. The file is thin, but every surviving line points to a single evening when ordinary errands and familiar streets folded into silence, leaving a gap in the timeline that investigators could never convincingly close. Witnesses remembered a hat, a streetcar, a riverbank, and a man who may not have existed. What no one could supply was the small missing hinge that would lock the sequence into certainty. You're watching True Crime Files. Don't forget to subscribe for more cases like this. The year itself mattered. Cities were loud with trolley bells and iron wheels. Electric bulbs hummed in shop windows. Gaslight still marked the side streets. Police telephones hung in call boxes that rattled in the wind. Photographs took time. People stood still for truth to appear. In that world, a day's routine felt solid until it wasn't, and on a cool evening in late spring, the name Margaret Snow entered a patrolman's notebook and never left it again. Records disagree on her age and trade. One payroll book lists a Margaret S. at a garment room, paid by the piece. A city directory notes a laundress with the same surname 2 blocks away. Another clipping calls her a shop girl near the wharf. The addresses overlap. The wages align. What they share is a boarding house on a tram line and a predictable walk to the corner stop, which is where witnesses last placed her before the timeline began to blur. The streetcar that night was late. A conductor's testimony mentions an obstruction near the yards and a brief stop while a teamster cleared the rails. He remembered brass tokens, a boy in a cap, a woman with a straw hat trimmed by a dark ribbon, and the smell of coal dust blown down from the river bridge. She sat by the rear window, he said later. He also said plenty of women wore hats that week. Nearly all of them carried small reticules. A detail remembered is not the same as a detail proved. Her routine, by accounts, rarely varied. After work she walked east, exchanged tokens, and stepped off near the post office to buy 2-cent stamps. One resident of the boarding house recalled a letter with a violet seal. Another insisted Margaret kept her letters in a trunk beneath the bed and never sealed them with colored wax at all. When the trunk was opened after the fact, the letters weren't there. A receipt for cleaning a blue skirt was. A pocket watch lay wrapped in tissue. The chain was snapped where it met the clasp. The inciting gap is simple. She left the doorway at dusk and never returned. Patrolman notes suggest light rain and a wind that pressed flyers flat against a telegraph pole, an advertisement for a traveling lecture and a sale on oilcloth. The patrolman wrote that he checked alleys and doorways and found nothing unusual. Not unusual in 1908 meant no fight, no shout, no broken glass. Absence leaves fewer marks than presence, and that would become the theme of the case. By morning the river had something to say. A ferryman noticed fabric near the pilings by the old timber ramp. He pushed off with a pole and fetched a pail shape to the shallows. The coroner's cart rattled over cobbles and took the body to a brick building where a ceiling fan turned slowly over a metal table. Here the record sharpens. The coroner measured height and weight, listed a small scar on the left forearm, and noted bruising along the hairline. He wrote that there was silt in the nose and throat but avoided the word that made headlines. Later coverage supplied it for him. A hat pin was recovered, bent at an angle that suggested force. The ribbon from a straw hat turned up downstream. Whether the ribbon and hatpin belonged to the same hat became a small argument that filled column inches when larger questions remained. The reticule was missing. A glove, right hand, lay in a patch of reeds. Laundry marks on the glove matched the numbers on the boarding house trunk inventory. That pushed the identification from strong to certain and moved the case from accident to suspicion. The geography matters to such cases. A streetcar line paralleled the river before turning inland, with a switch near a warehouse lot. Workers from the yard cut across the lot at shift changes. A walking path ran from the car stop to the bridge, hidden in places by stacked crates. The bend in the river made eddies that caught floating debris. It also made a perfect place to lower something below view. These are the kind of edges police walk again and again, shoes scuffing the same dust, waiting for a piece to spark against the dull ground. Investigators canvassed the boarding house. Rooms were small. Hallways smelled of soap and boiled vegetables. A roommate said Margaret had mentioned a small raise and the possibility of better hours if she were willing to help with ledgers. Another boarder remembered her speaking to a man outside 2 nights earlier. He wore a dark coat and a soft felt hat. Tall, but not especially, she said, which is the kind of description that fits too many men to be useful. The landlady kept an iron key on a string and insisted she noticed nothing at all. She also insisted on the rent. Evidence arrived in fragments. A letter postmarked 3 days earlier surfaced in a bureau drawer. Its lines were practical: a brother's health, a price for coal, the squeak in a stair. Nothing in it pointed to danger. A stamped envelope in the same drawer contained a pawn ticket for a silver locket. The locket itself would become a point of contention. Had Margaret pawned it to pay a debt, or had someone else pawned it to raise money quickly? The numbers on the ticket led to a shop 3 blocks south. At the pawn counter, the clerk remembered a young woman trembling as she signed. His statement was later amended when he conceded it could have been another woman entirely. The signature on the ticket matched Margaret's surname but not her known hand from the trunk. Or perhaps it did, depending on which examiner you believed. Handwriting in that era suffered hardy opinions masquerading as science. The police dutifully attached the slip to the file with a straight pin that left rust around the hole. A pharmacist came forward. He told officers a man had purchased laudanum under a false name 2 nights before the disappearance. His ledger recorded initials and a quantity. The initials mattered for 3 days until the pharmacist admitted he often wrote those same 2 letters for cash sales to save time. A newspaper made much of the laudanum and nothing of the retraction. Headlines move ink. Retractions move air. Witnesses along the streetcar line offered more confusion dressed as clarity. A boy selling papers swore he saw Margaret step off near the river and join a man by the fence. An older woman said she noticed the hat but never saw a companion. A drayman claimed he heard a shout but could not place the direction because a freight engine whistled at the same moment. A watchman at the bridge remembered a pair passing under a lamp, then hesitated on whether they were heading toward the water or away from it. Memory is elastic. Light rain makes it worse. The coroner's inquest convened in a paneled room where a jury of 12 tradesmen listened to a sequence of small certainties. The coroner listed bruises consistent with a struggle. He noted no broken bones. He wrote that water in the lungs indicated drowning but could not say with confidence whether it occurred before or after a blow to the head. The verdict returned as death by violence at the hands of person or persons unknown. That wording allowed police to intensify their search and newspapers to inflate their columns. It did not answer the central question. Detective work in 1908 straddled eras. Some departments trusted Bertillon measurements and cabinets of index cards. Others were trying fingerprints, a method still gaining ground stateside. In this case, a glass bottle found near the ramp showed smudges too faint for anyone to declare useful. The detectives measured shoe prints where the path met the water, compared them to common sizes sold on Commercial Street, and found they matched thousands. They dusted the boarding house trunk with lampblack and breathed hope into swirls that went nowhere. The science was ready to help. The surfaces were not. A turning point arrived by envelope. The editor of a morning paper received an unsigned letter written in a tidy, almost schoolbook hand. It described an argument by the bridge, a push, and a splash heard between trolley bells. The letter named no one but hinted at jealousy and debt. Police traced the stationery to a stationer who sold hundreds of pads. The flourished capital M looked like a teacher's model. The writer knew the path and the timing, though. Detectives marked that. They also marked the way the letter used weak to describe the city. When pressed, several mill workers admitted everyone knew the path. The letter promised heat. It delivered steam. Suspects surfaced in patterns. An employer was questioned about wages and whether he had walked with Margaret after closing. He denied it. A lodger who often waited on the stoop for evening air admitted he spoke with her about books and once loaned her a pamphlet about lectures at the library. "That is the extent of it," he said. He lost his temper when the detective asked whether he owned a soft felt hat. Temper is not guilt, but it fills the room like smoke. The most durable suspect was a shop clerk with a habit of wagering on horses. He had debts, knew the tram schedule, and sometimes loitered near the post office. A signalman thought he resembled the man by the fence. He admitted to knowing Margaret as the quiet girl with the ribboned hat. He denied walking her toward the water. Officers searched his room and found a broken hatpin in a drawer. That discovery occupied headlines for days. The defense would later argue that a broken hatpin in 1908 was as common as a dull pen. The prosecution would ask why he kept it at all. A second turning point came from the timetable itself. Streetcar logs recorded delays and crossings. On the night in question, the car Margaret was believed to ride reached the stop 3 minutes behind schedule. The shop clerk, by his own account, left his employer at closing and walked uphill to a tavern that stamped a beer chit at 7:35. Witnesses placed the car at the stop around 7:24. If she was on that car, he would have had to sprint, unseen, across 2 blocks, through a warehouse alley, and down to the path to meet her. The state countered by arguing she may have left an earlier car or lingered at the lamp. The entire question hinged on minutes in drizzle. Minutes don't testify. A grand jury indicted the clerk based on circumstantial strands that seemed to braid tight when read one after the other. The pawn ticket suggested need. The letter suggested motive. The hatpin suggested proximity. The clerk's temper suggested guilt to anyone who already suspected him. He was arrested at his room without incident. In his pocket, police found a folded race sheet and a train schedule to the next town. He said the train schedule helped him picture horses arriving from other tracks. Detectives called it flight planning. The line between explanation and excuse is sometimes a sentence's tone. The trial opened when ceiling fans stirred hot afternoon air and men fanned themselves with their hats. Reporters inked the first day into columns that stretched under advertisements for patent medicines. The prosecutor set a simple scene and asked the jury to fill the gaps with common sense. He met her by the fence, he said, quarreled in the shadow of the bridge, and sent her down to the black water. He held up the bent hatpin and the ribbon from the reeds. The room was quiet long enough for his silence to play like evidence. The defense attacked the chain. Who found the hatpin? Who handled it first? How was it marked? Had a constable placed it in a pocket before handing it over? The clerk's attorney called a conductress from another line who said she saw the accused at a different stop, lighting a cigarette beneath a lamp at the time of the alleged meeting. "I would not swear to the minute," she said, "but it was no earlier than the clock at the bake shop." Time in that courtroom became a character and never quite behaved. There were small quotes that drew lines. "I never saw her that night," the clerk said. A coworker said, "He was nervous, but he is always nervous on paydays." The landlady admitted, "I collect the rent, not stories." A detective finally conceded, "We have no eyewitness to hands upon the victim." After that sentence, a reporter stopped cribbing from speeches and began describing shoes along the first row, polished and dull, toes pointed toward a verdict no one could yet name. The coroner returned to the stand. He repeated his earlier notes. The bruises could come from a fall or from hands. The water in the lungs indicated breathing at first contact with the river, but resuscitation efforts can mimic that. A physician from the medical college suggested an experiment with pig lungs to settle such debates but admitted the method was untested in court. The jury listened but seemed to want less science and more certainty. Both were in short supply. The prosecution leaned on the anonymous letter. An expert in penmanship, so called in those days with an ease not afforded now, testified that the strokes matched the clerk's hand when he hurried. The defense produced receipts that proved he usually printed in block letters at work and that the letter's hand was neat and curved. The judge, a patient man with wire-rimmed glasses, allowed the testimony but cautioned the jury to weigh it as opinion, not fact. The editor of the paper admitted he had no envelope left to show. He had thrown it away after copying the postmark. This is how brittle evidence can be even when everyone is trying to hold on to it. A final witness for the defense altered the room. The conductor who once placed a woman in a straw hat by the rear window returned with his logbook. He had checked the line one more time and discovered an earlier note about a lady in a felt hat stepping off at the market, not the river. "I may have conflated the nights," he said, a sentence jurors nodded at with relief and the prosecutor frowned at with reflex. If her stop wasn't the river that night, the state's timeline thinned to a thread. The jury retired behind a door that clicked gently in the frame. They returned the next afternoon with a verdict that angled away from certainty. "Not guilty," the foreman said, his voice flat and tired. The clerk bowed his head. The prosecutor shuffled papers. The judge thanked the jurors for their service, a phrase then as now that meant the process was over, not that the story was done. Outside, the streetcar bell clanged as if nothing inside the courthouse had ever happened. After the acquittal, the case slowly cooled. Police followed a few late leads. A traveling laborer bragged in a bar and then recanted. A brooch that might have been the pawned locket turned out to belong to a seamstress who had never met Margaret. The anonymous letter writer never stepped forward. Summer heated the cobbles. Another docket filled. The coroner's ledger closed for the year with its neat lines and the single entry that mattered to this story. It read only a name, a date, and a river. Years later, a legislator proposed better training for evidence handling after a committee reviewed several unsolved deaths in the district. The report cited missing envelopes, pocket-carried exhibits, and imprecise timekeeping. It did not name Margaret, but the dates matched, and the examples felt familiar. A small allocation funded more electric lamps along the river path. A plaque about public safety went up near the bridge 2 administrations after anyone cared who paid for it. What remains in the archive is as instructive as what is missing. Photographs show a doorframe with a ruler held against scraped paint. In chalk someone wrote, "Number 3. The film captures a blurred hand and the shadow of a brim. Another photograph shows the ramp and the river's skin just before a breeze riffled it. A note on the back says, "Afternoon light." The case file includes typed questions for a witness who never appeared. The corner of the page is torn where a thumb gripped too hard. We can measure the system as much as the crime. Officers worked through rain with horses blowing and lamps flickering. They made choices with the methods at hand. They were sometimes careful, sometimes careless, always human. Reporters filled space because that was their job, and in doing so they hardened guesswork into the shape of memory. Juries looked for a story with a beginning, middle, and end. They got beginnings and middles and were forced to supply the rest themselves. There are, of course, theories. Did the man by the fence exist, or did the mind of a tired boy sharpen a shadow into a figure? Did jealousy speak in that tidy anonymous hand, or did civic anxiety write with the plural, "we," to feel braver in print? Did a stumble on wet boards become a death, or did hands push in a place designed to hide the act? The record urges us forward and then stops. The river holds the last word and offers it sparingly. If you stand where the path bends and listen to the water slap the pilings, you can hear how every city keeps a story it cannot reconcile. The boards have been replaced. The tram is gone. The bridge hums with different traffic. Yet in the archive, ink keeps its color. The coroner's careful script still spools into letters that make a name and a date, and that is enough to keep a question alive for more than a century. From this case, what we learn about its era and its systems is small and solid. Evidence matters, but so does how it is handled. Timetables are helpful until they harden into cages and trap the wrong shape of truth. Early science needs careful hands. Headlines are loud and wrong as often as they are loud and right. And grief, especially the kind without a defendant, sits in quiet rooms and asks the most patient question on earth: what happened, exactly? Police reports end. Lives end. Questions often do not. The boarding house is a different building now. The river has been dredged and shored. A museum keeps the coroner's ledger in a climate-controlled room. A docent will tell you the handwriting is beautiful because that is another way to say the past is legible even when it is not clear. On a page inside that ledger, the name Margaret Snow still carries the weight of a story that never learned how to land. The memory we keep is not of a villain's face or a prosecutor's flourish, but of small objects: a bent hatpin, a ribbon softened by water, a glove with a number scrawled in laundry ink. They sit in the mind like exhibits on a table. Someone asks whether they connect, and the room waits for coherence. Sometimes it never comes. Sometimes that is the honest answer. And in the quiet that follows, a city, a year, and a name settle back into their places, waiting for light that may never arrive.